Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to talk about how you can say you, or how you can address another person. Now, there are many ways that you can do this depending on who you're talking with or who you're talking about, as well as how polite you want to be. The first thing, though, to keep in mind is that it's not always necessary to say you. Honorific speech can be used when talking about someone else. And if that person you're also talking about is the person you're talking to, then the word you can just be assumed. However, there will be times that you need to say you. For example, if you're in a group, then even while looking directly at someone and using honorific speech, it might not be apparent who you're referring to. Or you might want to say you if you're not yet sure what to call someone else. For those cases, let's review a few ways to say you that can be polite. The most common and polite way that you can refer to another person is actually just by using their title. Now, a title can be a job title, for example, their position at the company. It can be a boss, teacher, your junior, or a senior. It could also be their relationship to you, for example, an older friend or a grandfather. Or this can just be a general term of respect. Now, some titles, such as many job titles or relationship titles, can be used either on their own or together after a person's name. For example, your boss, Miss Kim, could be 사장님 or Kim 사장님. Some general terms of respect are only used together after a person's name. For example, your coworker Hyunwoo could be Hyunwoo 씨, but not simply she. And other words that mean you are used on their own without a name. For example, 당신 could mean you, but not 빌리 당신 to someone named Billy. We'll learn about all of these and more in this lesson. First of all, let's talk about the word 당신. 당신 is usually one of the first words introduced that means you, and it is a general word to say you, but it's not going to be appropriate in most situations. 당신 can sound impolite or even rude when used incorrectly. Now, 당신 can be used when you're addressing someone you don't know anything about, not even their age, status, or title. And when used this way, 당신 is not a polite word. It can sound like you don't know them, nor perhaps do you want to know them. But because of that, 당신 can be used when saying you in general to an unknown audience. This is typically used in advertising. And 당신 can be used as a general way to say you in example sentences, or when literally translating the word you into Korean. This is especially common in textbooks. Some older couples may also use 당신 to mean you with the feeling of darling. This is less common nowadays, but you may still encounter it. So unless you're doing advertising or writing example sentences, instead of using 당신, to be polite, use a person's title or their name with a title. First, let's talk about a commonly used title, and that is 씨. Now, 씨 is a general title for showing respect to someone else, and can translate as Mr. or Miss, among other ways, and it can be used for both married and unmarried people. It can be used with a person's first name, last name, or even full name, followed by 씨. 씨 can be used toward other people that you know, but that you're not speaking casually toward. Simply using a person's name would instead be casual speech. However, although 씨 does show respect, it does not show a lot. Therefore, it should not be used to someone in a higher position than you, such as a teacher or a boss, or to someone who's much older. For example, calling your boss Kim 씨 would be seen as too informal and impolite. In addition, because 씨 shows some respect, it should not be used to anyone you're speaking casually toward, for example, your friends, or anyone who you're very close with. For example, calling a younger friend 빌리 씨 would sound overly polite and awkward. Next, let's talk about 님. Using a person's title, such as their job title, followed by 님, is one of the most respectful ways that you can refer to another person. Here's how that works. You take a title and you attach 님. Now, 님 is an honorific word, more so than 씨, which adds extra respect. For example, some common titles at work may be 사장, boss, 과장, section chief, 대리, deputy section chief, 회장, president, 팀장, team leader, and 고객, customer. These can become 사장님, 과장님, 대리님, 회장님, 팀장님, and 고객님 when used to refer to someone else. Note, do not use 씨 with any titles, so saying 사장씨 or 선생님씨 would not make sense. It's also common to use 님 together with a person's name, followed by their title, and then 님. This will most often be their last name. Here are a few common examples that you might find at the workplace. 박 사장님, boss Park. 김 과장님, section chief Kim. 이 대리님, deputy section chief Lee. 손 회장님, president 손. 최 팀장님, team leader 최. Now, there are a lot more job titles than just these ones I'm including here, but here are just a few more: 교수 for professor, 목사 for pastor, and 박사 for doctor. So these can be used in the same way as other titles together with 님. 박 교수님, Professor Park. 최 목사님, Pastor 최. 김 박사님, Dr. Kim. And of course, 김 선생님, Teacher Kim. Note that, of course, there are many more job titles than are included in this course. Before we go any further, let's talk a little bit more about the word 선생님. Now, the word 선생님 can be used to refer to any teacher. Note that this is always 선생님 and never just 선생. For example, 빌리 선생님 for Billy, who's a teacher. Younger students may also use the word 쌤 or 쌤 to mean 선생님. This is still a polite title. And in fact, some teachers may ask you to use these words, although less so than 선생님. For example, 빌리쌤. Note, do not use 씨 to refer to a teacher, as this can sound too informal. But the word 선생님 isn't only used to talk about a teacher. It can also be used to refer to any other person. Typically, this will be someone who's middle-aged or older and shows respect. This word, 선생님, has a respectful feel of saying sir or madam. In this way, 선생님 can be used to refer to a stranger or a customer whenever you want to sound respectful, without needing to use their name or another title. In addition, 선생님 can also be used to refer to a doctor. Now, this usage is the same as the regular word 선생님 toward a teacher. And we're not done with using 님. Just like 씨, 님 can also be used after a person's name to show even more respect than using 씨. Here's how that works. You take a person's name and you attach 님. Now, this shows more respect than 씨, and is commonly used in the workplace when referring to customers. 님 also has a respectful but impersonal feel of saying sir or madam. And in addition, unlike 씨, 님 can be used on its own, or after a name. For example, a hospital may use 님 when talking about patients, or calling their full names in the waiting room. For example, 김철수님. Now, 님 sounds polite, but again, it's not personal. Therefore, 님 should not be used in this way with anyone who you're familiar with, regardless of their age. For example, using 님 after your teacher's name would still sound awkward. But what if you're talking about a coworker or a colleague or a mentor or another student at your school? Well, you can also use these words 선배 and 후배. 선배 means senior and 후배 means junior. Note that the terms senior and junior are not related to age, but instead related simply to rank in that institution. For example, a person who's been in the same institution as you for more time, regardless of your age, would still be your senior. So, to show more respect, these two words can also be used as titles when referring to those people. So you can use 선배님 as a respectful title for someone who's your senior, or 후배님 as a respectful title for someone who's your junior. Note, while you can use the word 선배 to address a close senior, just like you could use the words 형, 오빠, 누나, and 언니, 후배 should not be used in the same way. For example, calling out to your close 선배 as 선배 is okay, but 후배 is not. So now we've talked about several work titles and professional titles that you can use, but what about for your family? Well, you can actually just use family titles to call out or refer to other family members. Here are just a few that you can use to your family members. 할머니 for grandmother and 할아버지 for grandfather, 아빠 for dad or 아버지 for father, and 엄마 for mom or 어머니 for mother. 형 would be an older brother to a male, 오빠 would be an older brother to a female, and 누나 would be an older sister to a male, while 언니 would be an older sister to a female. There's also 남동생 for a younger male sibling, 여동생 for a younger female sibling, or just 동생 for any younger sibling. Note that these three words are not used when you're calling out to your younger sibling. Instead, just use their name. These are only used when referring to a younger sibling. Now, those words are fine to use for your own family members, but if you're talking about someone else's family member and you want to show an additional amount of respect, there are also some honorific titles you can use for other people's family members. Here are some of those. These would be people who you want to show extra respect toward. For example, 할머님 for grandmother and 할아버님 for grandfather. 어머님 for mother and 아버님 for father. 아드님 for son and 따님 for daughter. And for other family titles, you also have these. 형님 for an older brother to a male, 오라버니 for an older brother to a female. Note that this word is rarely used. And the word 누님 for older sister to a male, and 언니 for an older sister to a female. Note that this word is the same. As well as the word 동생 for someone's younger sibling. This is also the same word. Alternatively, if you want to be even more polite, you could use the word 동생분. Now, when you're talking to a stranger, you can also use some of these titles to show respect toward them. For example, you could call a stranger 할머니 or 할머님, meaning grandmother, or 할아버지 or 할아버님 for a grandfather. This would not be your grandfather, but to anyone who appears old enough to be someone's grandmother or grandfather. Note that this sounds respectful. Alternatively, you could use 어머니 or 어머님 for mother and 아버지 or 아버님 for father to anyone who appears old enough to be your mother or father, not just a mother or father. Next, you can also use the word 이모 for an aunt. This can be used to any older female, so anyone old enough to be an aunt. This is also a normal word for aunt on the mother's side of the family. And for any older male, anyone old enough to be an uncle, you can also use the word 삼촌. This is also a normal word for uncle. Note that while you can use these terms, 이모 and 삼촌, they have more of a familiar feel, almost as if you're referring to them as your family. So these two are often more appropriately used when you're referring to workers in restaurants, and less so with strangers you meet on the street. So we've learned a lot about titles that you can use in the workplace as well as between family members, but what about your friends? How can you be respectful when talking about people you're close with? Here are a few examples. Note that this will be to any friend who's older than you, whether you speak casually with them or not. You can also use these family titles. 형, so any older male friend to a male. 오빠 would be any older male friend to a female. 누나, any older female friend to a male. And 언니, any older female friend to a female. Note, however, although these family titles can be used to friends, they're not always used. Typically, these four words are used when friends of different ages feel close, regardless of their age, again. However, some people may feel uncomfortable with these titles, either using them or having them used to them. So feel free to discuss this with your friend and know that there are no strict rules for using them. You may have already noticed this, but many of these titles are also used when talking about yourself in the third person. So basically being used to say I or me. Let's take a look at how that works. For example, instead of saying 나는, you could say 아빠는 or 엄마는 if you're a parent. A teacher may refer to themselves as 선생님 toward their students. Or someone's older friend may refer to themselves as 형, 오빠, 누나, or 언니. So when does this happen? Well, speaking about yourself in the third person can be used to slightly emphasize the relationship you have with that person. Almost like reminding them, like 아빠는, me your dad, 엄마는, me your mom. And this style of speaking can be used normally like the first person, so saying I or me. However, it is less common than just using 나 or 저. There's another word that you might hear when talking to a stranger, and that is 그쪽. Now, 그쪽 can be used momentarily to say you toward a stranger. 그쪽 can be used before you know how to better address a stranger. However, although it's not disrespectful, it doesn't sound especially polite. For example, using this word could sound like saying, you there, stranger. So it's better to avoid using 그쪽, as it can sound a bit impolite depending on the person and the situation. But it can be and is often still used. But we're not done with titles yet. Here are a few more that you can use when talking to or about others. Starting with 학생, meaning student. This can be used to anyone who appears to be the age of a student, anyone from elementary school up until college. It can also be used after a first name if you know that. For example, 빌리 학생. Next, 사장님, meaning boss. This can also be used to any worker in a store or restaurant. In this way, it means not only boss, but also owner. And it's a respectful term, even if they're not really the owner. Next, 기사님 means driver, and you can use this to the driver of any vehicle, such as a taxi driver. Next, 이모 means aunt. This can also be used to any older female worker, so old enough to be an aunt, in a store or restaurant. And 삼촌 for uncle. This can also be used to any older male worker, anyone old enough to be an uncle, in a store or restaurant. Next we have 언니, meaning older sister. This can be used to any female worker in a store or restaurant, and it can be used by both males and females when used in this way. Note that this word is otherwise only used by females to older female friends or sisters. Next we have 아저씨, meaning a middle-aged man. This can be used to refer to any man who's married or middle-aged. And finally, 아줌마, for a middle-aged woman. And this can be used to refer to any woman who's married or middle-aged. Note that some people may not appreciate being called by certain titles, specifically these ones, 아줌마, 이모, and 언니. I recommend avoiding these, at least at first. When in doubt, to be safe, you can always just say 여기요 or 저기요 to get someone's attention. I have a few notes about titles, but first let's do this listening practice. This is a conversation example between two coworkers. Here, the two coworkers are sitting down for lunch. First, 은지 says, 유리 씨, 여기 정말 예쁘네요. Yuri, here is really pretty, or this place is really pretty. 이런 곳은 어떻게 알았어요? How did you know, or how did you find out about this kind of place? And then Yuri replies, 괜찮죠? It's nice, isn't it? 친한 언니가 하는 곳이에요. It's a place run by, or literally here, done by, a close older friend of mine, 언니, so an older female friend of mine. So it's a place run by a friend. 네, yes. 다음에 회사 사람들이랑 같이 와요. Next time, let's come together with people from the company. 사장님도 좋아하실 것 같아요. I think the boss would like it too. 그래요. Okay. 주문할까요? Shall we order? 정현 언니. 정현, who is an older female friend, the friend who runs the store. 저 왔어요. I'm here. 민우 오빠는 지금 없어요? Is Minu, who is an older male friend, not here now?
유리 씨, 여기 정말 예쁘네요. 이런 곳은 어떻게 알았어요? 괜찮죠? 친한 언니가 하는 곳이에요. 네, 다음에 회사 사람들이랑 같이 와요. 사장님도 좋아하실 것 같아요. 그래요. 주문할까요, 정연 언니? 저 왔어요. 민우 오빠는 지금 없어요?
Before we go over some more notes, try to take this quick quiz. You can pause the video here and then unpause it when you're ready. Here are the answers. First, the most polite way to refer to another person is by using their name followed by she. That is incorrect. You can also use 님 to be even more polite. Next, true. Family titles such as 형, 오빠, 누나, and 언니 can also be used toward friends who are older than you. Next, false. It would be respectful to use 님 after a person's name, but not after their title. 님 is also used after titles. And last, true. Both 당신 and 그쪽 should be avoided in most cases. One more word for you that we didn't cover is 귀하, used in formal writing, such as business letters. This would be attached after a person's full name. For example, 김철수 귀하, so dear Kim Charsu. This lesson focused only on ways to say you that can sound polite. In a later lesson, we'll also learn more ways to say you, which can sound casual and are useful when speaking to close friends. Note that she is also used on television shows, for example, news programs, as a polite way to refer to other guests or when just mentioning others by name. However, this is done for the audience and may not be how the host would actually address that person off camera. Now, if this is your first time seeing any of these titles, focus on memorizing the titles that use 님 first. So, 선생님, 사장님, etc. And then using she with names. So in this lesson, we covered many ways that you can say you, and in the next lesson, we're going to learn more about honorific speech, specifically about honorific nouns. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next lesson. 그럼 다음에 또 봐!